The story begins with silence. Before we speak, before we even think, there is silence. And in that silence, something begins to form, a thought, a feeling, a truth trying to take shape through words. You were born into a world already filled with language. Before you even had the ability to form thoughts, others were already speaking for you. They named you. They told you who you are. They defined the world you would grow up in, with words, but you didn't notice. None of us do. Because words don't shout, they whisper. They shape our minds not by force, but by familiarity. And so, the invisible cage is built. Not with bars, but with everyday sentences, simple labels, casual judgments, and those tiny, ordinary phrases that sound harmless until they become your internal voice. I'm not good at this. That's just the way I am. I'll never be enough. I should be grateful. People don't change. Each of these phrases is a lock. They say the strongest prisons are the ones you can't see, the ones you grow up inside of, the ones that feel like home. And language, more than walls, more than rules, more than beliefs, is the architect of that prison. Welcome to the invisible cage. This is not just a story. It's an unlearning, a remembering, a return to the silence before the words. The words that built you. You think you're thinking, but are you really? How many of your thoughts are actually yours? How many are just echoes? You were 5. Someone said you were too sensitive. You didn't forget it. Not because you wanted to remember, but because your nervous system did. It logged the tone, the look, the silence that followed. And then you began to narrate yourself. With their words, you're overreacting. You're too much. You're not enough. And then, like a silent background noise, those phrases became part of your operating system. They didn't need to shout anymore. You whispered them to yourself. Every time you hesitated before saying something true, every time you minimized your needs, every time you apologized for existing too loudly, that wasn't thought. That was language. Borrowed. Recycled. Unquestioned. Language doesn't just describe reality. It creates it. It wraps around your experiences like skin around a body, so tightly, you no longer feel the boundary. If I told you that a child raised hearing the word danger 300 times a week develops a different brain than a child raised hearing the word safe, would you believe me? Because that's what the science says. Your amygdala, your emotional center, learns what to fear through language. It doesn't need direct experience. It just needs repetition. And repetition is what culture provides. It's what family provides. It's what you've been receiving since birth. And now, you've inherited a worldview disguised as your own. Maybe that's why you doubt your intuition. Maybe that's why the voice in your head sounds more like your mother, or your teacher, or your ex than it does you. But who is you really? Who are you beneath the language you were taught? Are you angry, or were you taught that your anger is dangerous? Are you lost, or were you taught that uncertainty equals failure? Are you weak, or were you just never told that gentleness is power? The words that built you can also bury you. But there's something else, something older than the words, a place in you that speaks without language, a part of you that feels before it explains, and that is where we're going. Because to rewrite the story, you first have to find the narrator and decide if you still trust them. The architecture of perception. What you see is not the world. It's your version of it. And that version is built with words. Your brain does not passively receive reality. It interprets. It filters. It labels. And what does it use to do that? Language. Without language, there is only raw sensation. Light, sound, smell, warmth, cold, pain, pleasure. But the moment you attach a word to something, it stops being just sensation. It becomes meaning. A tight chest, call it anxiety. and you'll treat it as a threat. Call it excitement, and you'll move toward it. A breakup? Label it rejection, and you'll feel shame. Call it redirection, and you'll feel empowered. Same event, same sensations, different words, completely different reality. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "The limits of my language are the limits of my world." What he meant was simple. You cannot experience what you cannot name, and what you name, you contain. Language is not just communication. It's a cognitive map. It tells you what to fear, what to value, what to chase, and what to avoid. And the scariest part? Most of that map was drawn by other people. If your inner vocabulary is made of words like, "I can't," "I'm not ready," "It's too late," "I don't deserve it," "I always mess things up," then no matter what reality offers you, you'll find a way to filter it through that lens. Not because it's true, but because it's familiar. The mind craves familiarity more than truth, and language is the shortcut to both. Now, here's what neuroscience tells us. Every time you repeat a thought, you deepen a neural pathway. Say it often enough, and it becomes automatic. I'm just not creative. I'm bad at relationships. I attract the wrong people. I'm unlucky. I always ruin good things. Do you see the pattern? These aren't descriptions. They're spells, self-fulfilling prophecies, silent commands to your nervous system, and your brain listens without question. But what if, just for a moment, you refuse to name things? What if you sat with sensation? Without rushing to explain it? What if you gave your body permission to feel? Without needing your mind to define? Would you find something truer than language? Because the truth is, words are powerful, but silence is holy. In between the two, you'll find a doorway out of the cage. The voice you think is yours. You don't remember the first time it spoke. Not out loud, but inside. Quiet. Matter of fact. Almost helpful. That was stupid. You always mess this up. Don't even try. They don't really like you. And you listened. You didn't argue. You didn't question it. Because it sounded familiar. Not like a stranger. Like a parent. A teacher. A sibling. A friend. Someone you trusted. Or someone you feared. That voice, the one narrating your every move, didn't start with you. It was given to you. From the moment you began to understand language, you were being programmed, not maliciously, just unconsciously, by adults who were themselves carrying an inherited pain, by teachers who didn't know how to hold your emotions, by systems designed for obedience, not authenticity. They told you things, sometimes directly, sometimes just with a sigh, a raised eyebrow, a sudden withdrawal of warmth. Be quiet. Don't cry. Stop being so dramatic. Why can't you be more like your brother? You'll understand when you're older. Because I said so. These weren't just rules. They were identity scripts. And slowly, you memorized them. You didn't know you were being trained. You thought you were being loved, or corrected, or protected. But what you were really learning was self-surveillance. So now, years later, you don't need anyone to police your feelings. You do it yourself. You shut down your own anger before anyone else can. You dismiss your needs before someone else labels you needy. You shrink preemptively so no one calls you too much. You downplay your dreams so you're not told they're unrealistic. Congratulations, you've become your own oppressor. And you call it being realistic. But what if that voice is just an echo? What if the shame you carry is someone else's voice, trapped inside your nervous system? What if the you who doubts yourself was built in response to someone else's inability to make space for you? Because here's the truth. You weren't too sensitive. They were too numb. You weren't too emotional. They were emotionally unavailable. You weren't too loud. They were too scared of their own silence. When you were a child, you thought the world was a mirror, that how people reacted to you was a reflection of who you were. But the mirror was broken, cracked by their trauma, fogged by their fear, distorted by generations of unspoken pain. And no one told you that, so you believed it. You blamed yourself. Now, you still do. But here's the gift in all this. What was learned can be unlearned. What was downloaded can be deleted. What was never yours can be returned. You can give the voice back. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You can begin to speak to yourself in a new language, a gentler one that doesn't command, but invites, one that doesn't judge, but witnesses, one that doesn't fix, but holds. You can become the voice you never had. The cultural dictionary you didn't know you had. There is a dictionary inside you, but you didn't write it. It defines words like success, failure, love, worth, strength, beauty, enough. But if you look closer, really look, you'll notice something strange. These definitions didn't come from within you. They came from outside, from ads, from magazines, from movies, from religions, from classrooms, from dinner tables, and they came dressed in certainty, as if there were only one meaning. Success means money, status, being known. Beauty means symmetry, thinness, youth. Masculinity means silence, toughness, control. Femininity means softness, pleasing, sacrifice. Strength means never breaking. Weakness means asking for help. Normal means fitting in. Crazy means feeling deeply. But what if you've been living by definitions that don't serve you? What if your entire emotional GPS has been calibrated by someone else's language? Every culture has a code, a set of phrases you're expected to believe without question. That's just how things are. Boys don't cry. Nice girls don't get angry. Don't talk about that. You're being too sensitive. Toughen up. This is for your own good. It could be worse. These are not just sayings. They're cages. Spoken so often, they stop sounding like commands and start sounding like facts. But they're not facts. They're linguistic spells, designed to keep things in order, to keep you manageable, predictable, small. Now look around. Language controls more than your inner world. It shapes entire societies. Call someone a criminal, and you justify punishment. Call them mentally ill, and you justify confinement. Call them lazy, and you remove empathy. Call them other, and you remove humanity. Words don't just describe the world. They divide it, classify it, control it. And if you're not aware of the language you've absorbed, you'll become an enforcer of the very systems that once hurt you. The truth is, language is never neutral. Every word you've ever heard was soaked in someone else's worldview. And if you never stop to question it, you'll confuse social programming with personal truth. So ask yourself, whose voice do you hear? When you define love, whose idea of success lives in your calendar? Whose fears are guiding your decisions? Whose version of you are you trying to become? Because healing often begins with rewriting the definitions, not with big revolutions, but with quiet edits. Change, I'm behind. 2, I'm on my path. Change, I'm too much. 2, I'm whole. Change, I failed. 2, I'm learning. Each new phrase is a key. Each edit is a crack in the cage. And eventually, light gets in. The Stoic reframe. Language as liberation. It's not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. Epictetus, what if you're suffering, is not coming from what happened, but from the words you chose to describe it, that heartbreak. Was it really rejection? Or could it be redirection? That delay. Was it really failure? Or simply preparation? That silence. Was it really abandonment? Or a sacred pause to return to yourself? The Stoics taught one thing over and over again. You cannot control the world, but you can control your perception of it. And how do we perceive? Through language. Language is the lens. Change the words, and you change the view. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in the dead of night, reminded his own mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say, you'll find peace in controlling people. He didn't say truth comes from fixing the world. He said, your mind is the kingdom, and words are its rulers. The Stoics were early masters of internal editing. They knew that emotional suffering often begins with a sentence, not with pain itself, but with what we call it. Is it loss or letting go? Is it tragedy or transformation? Is it chaos or change? We don't react to reality. We react to the meaning we give it, and meaning is language in disguise. Modern neuroscience now echoes what the Stoics knew thousands of years ago. Your words create your experience. Label an emotion, and the brain responds accordingly. Say, I am worthless, and cortisol rises. Say, I am safe, and the body softens. This is not magic. This is biology. This is language as medicine or poison. The choice is always yours. But how do we choose? When the words we use were handed to us? This is where the Stoic art begins. Discernment, awareness, deliberate inner speech. They practiced this like a craft. The art of reframing. They didn't deny pain. They simply refused to let it write the story. You can do the same. You can sit with grief and still call it love. You can feel fear and still call it courage. You can lose and still call it a beginning, because reframing isn't lying, it's liberation. So the next time your inner voice speaks, pause. Ask yourself, is this a fact or just familiar phrasing? Is this pain or just a worn-out word that needs replacing? You are not what happened to you. You are what you tell yourself about it, and that story can be rewritten. When words become flesh, not all memories are stored as stories. Some are stored as tension, as shallow breaths, as clenched jaws, as a subtle tightness in the chest that you've carried for years. You think it's just stress? You call it being tired off? Not myself. But what if those feelings are words your body couldn't say? What if the body remembers everything the mind refused to process? There's a language beneath language. It doesn't use grammar. It doesn't speak in sentences. It speaks in sensations. Your body has been listening since the beginning, and where the world gave you no permission to speak, your body kept the score. That moment you were told to stop crying, your throat tightened. You never fully relaxed it again. That time someone mocked your vulnerability. Your spine curled forward. You started walking smaller. That season of silence, when you were hurting but had to smile. Your stomach learned to hold your sorrow like a secret, and you wonder why you're always tired. Why you carry weight that exercise can't touch. Why you can't breathe deeply even when you're safe. Because the cage wasn't just built in the mind. It lives in the nervous system, wired in. And words were the architects. You see, when you say I'm fine, but your body is screaming, I'm overwhelmed. That dissonance becomes trauma, not because something is broken, but because something has been split. Language went one way, the body went another, and the self got lost in between. But healing begins when those two parts, the verbal and the visceral, start speaking to each other again. When you stop narrating your emotions and start feeling them. When you stop explaining your pain and start listening to its rhythm. When you stop asking what's wrong with me and start asking, what is my body trying to say? That words have never been able to. Here's the quiet truth. Sometimes the most honest parts of you don't speak English or any language at all. They speak in breath, in shivers, in tears that come out of nowhere, in sudden stillness, in goosebumps when no one's touching you. In those moments, the ones you can't explain, are often the most real. So let your body speak, even if you don't understand it yet, even if it doesn't make sense. Especially then, because long before you could say, "I'm scared," you trembled. Long before you could say, "I'm lonely," your chest ached. Long before you could say, "I'm hurt," you hid. Your body was fluent in your truth. Long before your mind ever caught up. So now, give it back its language. Not by forcing words on it, but by listening deeply, patiently, lovingly. Because maybe healing doesn't sound like, "I'm over it." Maybe it sounds like breathing all the way in, for the first time in years, rewriting the voice within. You've lived for years with a voice in your head that wasn't yours. It criticized, it minimized, it doubted, it compared, it pushed and pulled and poked, all under the disguise of helping you improve. But improvement isn't born from shame. Growth doesn't come from cruelty, and you can't hate yourself into becoming someone you love. So here's the truth. You can change the voice. You can rewrite the tone. You can speak to yourself differently. Not because everything's perfect, but because you finally see the lie that you needed to be hard on yourself to be strong, that you needed to earn your worth. That love was something you had to deserve. What if the voice in your head sounded more like a friend than a drill sergeant? What if instead of, "You're so behind," you heard, "You're right on time"? Instead of, "You always mess this up," you heard, "It's okay to be human." Instead of, "They don't like you," you heard, "You don't need to perform to belong." This isn't just affirmation. This is reparenting. This is soul surgery. You've internalized thousands of voices, but now it's time to choose yours. The conscious voice, the compassionate one, the clear one. And yes, at first it will feel fake, unfamiliar, awkward, because your nervous system is addicted to the old soundtrack. But stay with it. Practice. Whisper kindness. Even when your mouth tastes like doubt, offer patience. Even when you want to scream, speak gently, especially when you feel like you don't deserve it. Because healing sounds strange. When you're used to hurt, start with small phrases. Let them land softly. I'm allowed to rest. I am learning. I don't need to prove anything. I forgive myself for not knowing before. I'm still becoming. Say them. Then say them again. Then say them until they don't feel like lies anymore, but memories you forgot were true. Because language is not just what we say. It's what we repeat. Repetition is how we were broken. Repetition is how we heal. So say it again. I'm not behind. I'm becoming. I'm not broken. I'm unfolding. I'm not too much. I'm finally meeting myself fully. This is your new language. This is your new voice. This is the beginning of freedom. Beyond words, the place where you begin again. At the edge of language, there is silence, not emptiness, but something fuller than sound, something older than thought, something more real than identity. You've spent a lifetime wrapped in words. What to say, what not to say, what to believe, what to become, but underneath it all, you've always been more than what you could describe. You are not the voice in your head. You are the space the voice echoes through, the stillness between the sentences, the watcher, the witness, the one who remembers the truth, even when the words forget. Who am I without the noise? What is left when the story ends? Not nothing, but everything. The you that breathes before it speaks, the you that feels without naming, the you that exists without explanation. You see, the point of all this was never to perfect your words. It was to loosen their grip, to remember that every label is just a layer, and who you are lives beneath them. You are not your trauma, not your productivity, not your beliefs, not your mistakes, not even your name. You are what's left. When all of that is silent, and in that silence, healing happens. Because when you no longer have to describe yourself, you finally get to be yourself. Without proof, without performance, without permission. So take a breath, one that belongs only to you, and listen to the rhythm of your chest, to the quiet between your thoughts, to the peace that's been here the whole time, just waiting for you to turn the volume down. The cage was never locked. It was just loud. And you are the key. Not because you forced your way out, but because you finally stopped believing you belonged inside. The language that erases thought. In 1949, George Orwell wrote a book called 1984. He imagined a future where a totalitarian regime controlled everything, not just people's actions, but their thoughts. How? Through language. They called it newspeak, a simplified, stripped-down version of English. Words were removed, definitions rewritten, concepts erased. Words like freedom, justice, rebellion, truth simply didn't exist. And if you can't name something, you can't think it. If you can't think it, you can't desire it. If you can't desire it, you never realize it's missing. This wasn't just science fiction. It was a warning that language doesn't just reflect thought, it limits it. And long before a system takes your rights, it takes your words. Think about the words you were never taught, the ones your culture doesn't offer. Words like consent, boundaries, emotional neglect, gaslighting, inner child, trauma-informed, safe space. If you didn't have the words for those things, did you ever realize they were happening to you? How many years did you suffer? Because you didn't know what to call it? This is how language cages the soul. Not by locking you up, but by hiding the door. Comma. This isn't just about governments or dystopias. It's about families, schools, religions, cultures. They teach you to speak within their boundaries. They reward silence when it protects tradition. They punish vocabulary that threatens the structure. Don't say that. That's not how we talk here. You're being dramatic. Stop overthinking. You're too sensitive. Let it go. These aren't just corrections. They're deletions. And over time, you become fluent in denial, articulate in repression, fluent in forgetting yourself. So when someone finally says, "That was abuse," you were gaslit. You have a right to feel safe. You don't owe them your silence. You don't just feel heard. You feel named. And suddenly, you realize the cage wasn't locked. You just didn't have the word for exit. Language is the boundary between survival and awareness, between enduring and awakening, between silence and truth. Orwell was right. Take away the word. You take away the possibility, but give someone the right word, and they start to remember themselves. Language as therapy, rewriting the inner script. Every day, you're speaking to yourself, most of it. You don't even hear. It happens in the margins of your awareness. When you spill something, when you make a mistake, when you feel rejected, when things don't go the way you hoped, that voice rises up. Automatically. Idiot. Why do you always do this? What's wrong with you? You're so behind. No one really cares. And because it's quiet, you think it's harmless, but your body listens. Every single time. What if you knew that your words shape your biochemistry? That a harsh thought can spike cortisol, while a gentle one can activate oxytocin, the hormone of safety and connection? What if your cells are responding to every internal sentence you whisper? This isn't philosophy. This is therapy. This is healing through language. Let's begin softly. Instead of "I messed everything up," try "I did what I could with what I knew." Instead of "No one wants me," try "I'm learning to want myself." Instead of "I'm broken," try "I carry stories that are still healing." Instead of "I'm not enough," try "I am already whole. I'm just unfolding." And if those feel like lies at first, good. That means you're doing it right, because you're speaking a new language. And fluency takes time. Let me tell you something important. You were not born self-critical. You learned that voice, and what is learned can be unlearned. Every time you speak to yourself with kindness, you're laying down a new neural pathway. Every time you pause before the self-blame, you're interrupting decades of inherited pain. Every time you say, "I deserve gentleness," even if you don't believe it, you are changing the code. This is the practice. This is the therapy, not in a clinic, not in a diagnosis, but in your daily language. So start writing new sentences. Tiny ones. I'm allowed to be here. This feeling will pass. I forgive myself for surviving the only way I knew how. I'm still learning what safety feels like. I'm not too late. I'm right on time. Write them. Say them. Whisper them. Repeat them until they become part of your bones. And when the old voice returns, because it will, don't fight it. Just notice and gently correct. I hear you, but that's an old script, and I don't speak that language anymore. The quiet revolution. Freedom as language. You've spent your whole life speaking. To others, to yourself, to the world. But now, you've begun to listen. Beneath the noise, beneath the scripts, beneath the voices that never belonged to you. And in that listening, you found space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space to choose your words. Carefully. Intentionally. Lovingly. This is what freedom sounds like. Not volume, but permission. To speak gently. To pause. To not speak at all. To wait for words that feel like home before you say them. Because now you know. Language is power. And power can be soft. Power can be kind. Power can be healing. You no longer owe your story to the voices that taught you shame. You don't need to explain your healing in someone else's vocabulary. You don't have to shrink your truth to fit into someone else's comfort zone. You can write your own dictionary now. Define your own success. Redefine strength. Reclaim softness. Speak to yourself in a way that builds, not breaks. And when you forget, because you will, let that forgetting be gentle too. You are not trying to be perfect. You are trying to be free. And freedom isn't loud. It doesn't demand. It doesn't rush. It whispers, "I'm here. You're safe. You can begin again." So, this is your quiet revolution. Not a war. A rewriting. A soft rebellion. Against every word that was never yours. You are free now. Not because someone gave you permission, but because you remembered. You never needed it. The invisible cage is visible now, and that's how it crumbles.